with Ray to kind of come and give a talk about the island flying, and I'm going to be kind of shifting back and forth between the Caribbean in general and the Bahamas. Actually, I got to point this out, my fabulous shirt, a lot of the places I'm going to be talking about, these are actually represented here, and Sam actually have El Catay right here. So. Anyway, the first thing I want to say, well, I'm going to ask the question. Other than I know Sam has flown lots of flights, has anybody flown their own plane out to the islands? Chris, you have? Okay, awesome. Which island?
We went over to the Bahamas up to, no, we were going,
Abacos?
No, the big.
Oh, Nassau?
No.
Freeport?
Freeport.
All right.
We just went over to Freeport during COVID. We were looking for something, get an overnight trip.
Sweet. Run into any headaches?
No, just, it was the place was a ghost town during the Bahamas event, so that was a little difficult, but other than that, everything was good.
Can we flip the lights
Oh,
off?
yes.
Is that?
Dave, can you hit that switch right there?
So a year ago, I participated in a trip from Fort Lauderdale Executive all the way down to Martinique. And it was part of a Caribbean air rally, which is actually put together by a group. So I always wanted to do this. It was kind of a bucket list. Hey, let's go fly to the islands. And living in Oregon, the islands are a long ways away. So once I got down here and moved to Florida, and you may have heard my talk about flying my little Sonics from Oregon down to Florida. Well, then I went back and I picked up my Lance Air and brought it to Florida as well. Now I had the springboard of places that I could go, things I could do. A little bit about me. I am an engineer, so I tend to overanalyze everything. And you're going to hear a lot of the details today about, preparing for the flight, preparing the airplane. I have been flying for 35 years, but I've only got, 1,000 or so hours. And if you do the math, that's pretty pathetic. It's 30 hours a year or something along that. So I'm not a professional pilot. I fly for fun. I enjoy the building of an airplane. I've built both my airplanes. I've been involved, I've owned several Grummans. I've owned a Mooney. I've owned a Citabra, got my tail wheel, but I'm not a frequent a flyer, if you will. So when I talk about this, it's within you guys' capability of doing, and I'm going to be trying to persuade you that this is something that you should think about and maybe consider. So the first thing, I decided to go as part of a group, and by doing this, they kind of alleviated a lot of my fears. They helped me with the flight planning, they helped me with the paperwork, they coordinated the lodging, they just kind of, I wrote a check, and I kind of showed up, and you go along for the ride. And I'll come back and talk about this particular group a little bit later. And then once you're over the hump of doing it with a group, you're going to find, I can do this on my own. I don't have to go with a group any longer. But it was called International Air Rally, and they do several trips, and you may or may not be able to see this. There is something they call the Caribbean Skyway, which is essentially following the islands down as far as you can. All the way, actually, you can take, and they did this trip all the way down to South America, flew the loop back through Mexico, and they did this back in 2018 over a course of 18 days. Kind of a cool trip, and I guess there was some real drama flying over Colombia. I don't know how I feel about that. Landing in Cartagena, But this year they are actually flying down to Bequia, which is a little island down here, and then returning. But it tends to use a lot of the same airports over and over again. So what I'm going to be covering today is kind of the basics of resources available, how to prepare, the customs, the paperwork, how you do your flight planning. There's a couple of small issues, like a lot of water out there. We'll talk about how do you address that. Enjoying the flight and then getting back in. It's so easy to get out of the U.S. It's a little more challenging to get back in. And then just a little talk on the Bahamas toward the end, because it's so easy to do. There's a lot of resources available to you. Some of them, and I can pass some of these around. Two of my favorites are actually put out by AOPA. One is called the Bahamas, and one is called the Caribbean. And I'll just kind of pass those around. There are some free planning guides that you can get, and I'll mention this here shortly. You can get a lot of this stuff at Oshkosh. You can get it at Sun and Fun. You can pick up these VFR flight guides. I'll pass those around. You may have seen them before. They're kind of nice tools. And almost all of them has if you want to do it, here's the steps. Here's like U.S. Customs. Here's your checklist for getting out of the U.S. Here's your checklist for getting back into the U.S. Much more important. So, and as you'll see, like that one, you can open it up. You'll see kind of a VFR flight planning. You'll see a little detail on all the various islands. And again, pick them up when you're down, and pick up a bunch, actually, because I find that I tend to give them away to different people until I'm almost out of them myself. So there are a lot of resources available. As we get ready to prepare the plane, this was my Lancer, you have to change your airplane documents just a little. And some things that are a little odd. Get your customs paperwork together. You have safety equipment to be concerned about. Getting your plane ready mechanically, and also it's a good idea to take some spares with you, and I'll kind of itemize some of that. Now, just a brief note about how we organize the Caribbean rally, because there was 25 planes, everything from a Cessna 172 all the way up to I forget what the fastest plane was. But the key here is they broke them down into 3 categories. If you were less than 145 knots, you were a tanker, yellow tanker. If you were faster than 165, you were a wolf, a gray wolf. And I'm thinking that, yeah, we had a TBM up there. And so, you know, cruise speed, 310. But however, the speed really isn't important. What's important is your range. So they did lay out the endurance, and I want to point out that the plane that had the shortest endurance was a Cessna 340 at 3 hours and 45 minutes. Anybody have a plane that flies less than 3 hours, 3.5 hours full? All right, you can go to the Bahamas, not a problem. I will very proudly state that my plane, I put down 8 hours, and in fact, it was actually closer to 9 that I had a range on. My bladder doesn't have that kind of range, but my airplane did, and certainly, and my wife's a better sport about it than sometimes I am. And as we departed, what they did is we departed slowest to fastest, so the idea would be, good or bad, everybody kind of arrives at the destination about the same time. VFR first, IFR last, and in the islands we've discovered sometimes IFR clearances take a while to be delivered. So just a little heads up on that. Fuel management, I'm speaking about my plane in particular. My plane handles almost 100 gallons, 2 tanks of 49. And regular cruise, I'm about 11 gallons an hour, actually 10.6 economy cruise. So I did the calculations, if, you know, somewhere between 7 and almost 10 hours, depending on how I'm running. So I plan 160 knots, 185 mile an hour, that gives me a range of 1,600 miles. I could pretty much go down to Martinique and without fueling at all, if I wanted to. So, however, if we made plans for the planes that could not or did not have that range. The 172s had no issue whatsoever. They were just always very aware of their fuel limitations. Okay, you're all familiar with Aero. You all have Aero in your airplanes. And for the new people, Aero stands for airworthiness, registration, forget the radio just a second, but radio license, operating limitations, and then weight and balance information. You carry those with you every place you go. It's required you maintain them in your airplane. When flying international, you have to incorporate the 12-inch letters on your end numbers, and, okay, you have to have a radio telephone license for the aircraft. Guess what? That costs a little bit more. It's a one-time thing, $100, I think. You, as an operator, have to have a radio operator's permit. I think it's about another $75. So there's some costs that these are one-time things. Once you get them, they're permanent forever. Make sure that your insurance is good outside the country. You don't want to be, balling up an airplane and find out that your insurance didn't cover you once you're outside the continental United States. You have to have customs and border patrol paperwork, which essentially is a sticker that you'll buy. And you have an option of an overflight permit. I'll come back and talk about that. So more paperwork that you have to include. For your personal documents, of course, you have to have a passport, driver's license. We flew back in 2022, and they were still requiring vaccination records for COVID. Optional, some people really like the idea of having medical evacuation coverage. So if you have a situation, you have a med jet there and they're bringing you back and it's covered by the policy. I didn't have that. I'm a little more frugal. Emergency contacts in the States, of course, your airplane documents, cash. Cash is king. Several places you really don't want to be using credit cards. One, they'll charge you more. Two, in a few islands, it's not safe to use them. And some places won't take credit cards. They will take cash. And by the way, US dollars, good. Every place we went, they took US dollars. And we had no trouble at all with currency. Not to say that's true at every island, but the ones we visited wasn't a problem. All right, it is required when you're flying over water to have a life jacket available. You don't have to wear it. It can be in the back seat, but you must have one. So my wife and I, we use these little low-profile ones. You can see me wearing it here. It's not really in the way. Matter of fact, you don't even notice it. And it costs you between $50 and $100. You can get them from Amazon, okay? Now, all the books say, oh, you should have a life raft. Well, this is debatable, and let me tell you why. I have a tricycle gear plane. This guy did an amazing job, but that airplane is going to end up at least on its nose, probably on its back. And I don't really know, until you try it, how much time you have to get out of your airplane. So we debated, and we decided that we would not use a raft. However, some people did. They had a guy flew a Diamond down, and he had a raft in the back. This little raft here, two-person, only 13 pounds, about $1,200. If it makes you feel better, have one. Sam, do you have a raft?
I do, and I have a twin engine that has retractable gear, and I still have one. I don't like to swim that far.
Yeah. I think that there is
I think mine weighs 17 pounds. I got it at Sun and Fun.
And it's probably a
years ago.
four-seater,
It's
right?
like this.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's four, so it's only Patty and myself.
And my shoes.
So,
Oh, yeah. Well, you better get one for $6.
But see, we can tow the shoes.
Well, if they're Crocs, they would float. You could use those as PFDs.
And the vest, a lot of people like the around the waist because of comfort. I think Jim does, but I have that, but make sure it's manual, not auto, so you don't blow up inside the plane.
Yeah, so the auto inflators, if they hit salt or if they hit water in general, they'll automatically inflate. Now these things don't become huge. I'm not sure I'd want to be out in the water for 10 hours, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, so there's a comfort, there's a price, there's a weight, there's an accessibility, and Sam's absolutely right. Fixed gear people have more of this concern. If you land and your gear's up, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be floating, right side up. And the other thing, when you get your raft configured, certainly things like your personal locator beacon, which I use a spot unit, clothing, food, flares, all that stuff you might want to consider as safety equipment. Airplane prep. What can you do to make sure that this thing isn't going to break on you? And I have a personal story here to take here. Obviously, I'm not going to go through every this. You can annual your plane. Make sure your oil's current. Update all your software. It's the basic things that you do for maintenance. I will say the ones that are important that I would say really focus on: tires, brakes, batteries, and also just go through and make sure that everything's safety wired and safety tied down. Make sure your fluids and hydraulics are all proper. Fill your oxygen, and clean your surfaces. Clean the plane. Why do you clean the plane? Because it's easier to see if something is leaking. If I have a clean plane, I can see if there's oil, there's fuel, there's hydraulic, blah, blah, blah. So it's recommended. Now, somebody with a small plane isn't going to have a lot of weight to give. Take as many spares as you can fit in your plane. Essentials. First of all, most of the places we flew to, I have yet to even have a tie down. Nobody has tie downs. I have all my ropes, I have all my stuff, but you come up and they either provide chocks, or I recommend bringing your own chocks along because the tie downs just don't exist. Bring your own oil, extra spark plugs just in case, inner tubes and tires, at least inner tubes, maybe not so much tires. And then the emergency stuff: tie wraps, duct tape. I have dual electronic ignitions. I carry one ignition module with me, miscellaneous hardware, and of course whatever tools that you might need to facilitate. Here's a suggestion: if there is a way that you can change a tire on your own plane or replace a tube, try to take the minimum of amount of equipment to do that. That's just a good suggestion. Other than screwdrivers, wrenches, blah blah blah. Something, a towel, a mat, a rug you can throw down on the tarmac because it's hot, and you may be laying there. You may be working on a hot plane. Bring gloves. I carry a small jack with me so that I can literally lift the plane. Now, how did I learn this? Okay, so last December in 2022, we were making this trip, and I flew into Provinciales in the Caicos, and this was the first stop. We had taken off at Fort Lauderdale Executive, flown to, and you could see the plane sitting there. I decided I'd take a picture. I got the oil fill thing open, so I'm kind of cooling the engine a little bit while we're inside clearing customs. I want to point out that in fact, my tire was inflated. It was maybe a little low, but as I did my walk around, it just wasn't a problem. Well, anyway, I started to take off and the plane just wouldn't turn. And somewhere along the way, I had sheared off my valve stem. And so you're at the mercy of if there's an FBO there, which there was a customs clearance, but there really wasn't an FBO. They had no maintenance. They actually called and borrowed a guy from the local airline to come down, a maintenance guy to help us out. I didn't have a jack. I didn't have a tube. I didn't have all the things that I just told you should have. So my plane ended up being down for a day or so until I ordered a new tube from Aircraft Spruce, $107. Oh, 2-day overnight shipping, which they consider overnight, $218. I decided to go and because the rest of the group was leaving, and I'm like, okay, my wife and I decided we just go ahead and catch a commercial flight over to Grand Turk. So we had flights, we had extra hotels, we had meals, and then they came and charged me $900 to change the tube.
Oh no.
$900. what do you do? It's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna pay that. Well, we're keeping your plane. So it ended up being about a $2,000 maintenance problem, and it cost me about 2 days of the trip. My wife went on with another pilot. I went on and flew commercial, did some of the trip, came back, picked up the plane, and went on. But just a lesson that I learned. So as you're crossing the various borders in the islands, there's some things that you need to be aware of when it comes to customs. And the big characters are the ADIs. Now, if you've flown outside the U.S. or flown to Canada or flown to Mexico, you have penetrated the ADIs before. That's the, how quickly we forget, Aircraft Defense Identification Zone. There we go, air defense. So I used to think of the ADIs as a line. It was like a line. You don't cross the line without some notification. It's really a range, and that ADIS kind of gets wider and narrower depending upon where you're at. So you have to have permission to exit the ADIS. You have to have permission to re-enter. You have to have two-way radio contact. You have to have mode C transponder. You have to be on an active flight plan, and this is where, when you do your flight plans, there's something called a DVFR, Defense VFR, or IFR, or flight following. Now, you guys use flight following? Everybody use flight occasionally? Occasionally, yeah. When you do flight following, I just learned this recently. I thought it was, okay, well, I tell them who I am, they find me on the radar, and they kind of track me. No, when you do flight following, they ask you where you're from, where you're going, and they actually build a mini flight plan for you that they expect you to kind of follow. So that's why they're asking you all that information. They're building a flight plan, they're putting in, and then they're having you follow it. So yeah, it's really not a big deal, getting out of the country, and I'm going to talk about some of these other things. The EAPIS, the Electronic Advanced Passenger Information System. You can do this online, you can do it through apps, and it works for the US, the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, and then outside that, there's a different type of system. So what you end up doing is you list your crew, which is typically myself and my wife, because you don't pay taxes on crew. It's a nice little caveat. You tell them when you're leaving, when you're arriving, what airport you're leaving from, airport you're going to. Do you have your CPD permit, CBP, emergency contacts, an approximate time that you're going to be hitting the ADIS. Now, you get this email back and it says, oh, we've received your email. This is not an approval to land. So you can apply for an EAPIS weeks ahead of your flight. It's pretty easy. You do it, you think I'm going to go to the islands, great, I'll go ahead and file this. And then right before your flight, you will say your arrival is granted. So permission to land has been granted. So this happened to be coming back into the U.S., landing at Leesburg Airport. So just something you'd be aware, you have to make sure you've got the paperwork in order. Now, the Customs and Border Patrol, every year, $35. That allows you to use the customs facilities. Not a big deal. You can order them 2 years at a time, and they just want you to stack them up on your airplane. So another cost. When you're coming back, it was actually kind of nice, the various airports where you're going to clear customs, because you have to tell them where you're going to clear. Not only do you have to tell them where you're going to clear, you have to tell them exactly when you're going to clear within plus or minus 30 minutes. We had chosen to use Leesburg. Now, I have a piece of paper that says you have been granted permission to land at a certain time, but it's always recommended that you actually call, I'll give you the number, call before you take off and say, yeah, customs officer, I'm getting ready to leave. I'm going to be there in 3 hours and 45 minutes. And the reason for that is if you vary more than 30 minutes from your flight plan, you have to refile an APIS, or you have to notify customs. Well, we had a situation where we missed our target. You're at 10,000 feet, you're flying along, and in the old days, you could just ask ATC. You could put a little note on your flight plan to say, hey, would you advise customs? They don't do that anymore. So they've created a situation where it's very difficult to update customs to tell them you're going to be late, or in my case, I was going to be early. And also watch out for what they call user fee-based airports. Leesburg is one of them. A lot of airports you fly in, there's no charge to clear customs. It's covered by your $35 permit. When I flew into Leesburg, they charged us $71 to clear. And they just said, hey, we're a user-based or user fee airport, so pay it or suffer the consequences. If you're flying outside U.S., Puerto Rico, Bahamas, you have to use what's called CARICOM. CARICOM is the same thing as EAPIS. It's just for the outer islands. And so a lot of the islands is standardized on this particular form. It's the same thing. You list your crew, you list your departure, you list your arrival time, except, you know what? Nobody seems to care. Life in the islands are very relaxed, unlike the United States. So yeah, you file it, but it seems like if you didn't, I don't know if anybody would even come knocking and asking, but it's something you have to do. All right, there's a general declaration. We call them Gendexes. And there's a whole bunch of forms, depending on whether you're the U.S. or the Bahamas or the various islands. Every place that you land, you need to have at least 3 copies. Don't ask me why. They want multiple copies. And it's the same form. So what we do is we fill out the form ahead of time with my wife and I and our passport information. And it seems like they're more than happy. If you have a U.S. form, the Bahamas takes it, the various islands take it, but you got to have your 3 copies. So just print out a couple dozen and fill in the date, fill in the destination, fill it in kind of as needed. And that really kind of saves you a lot of headaches. But it is the same form, and it is the same information over and over. If you're going to the Bahamas, you have to file what's called a cruising permit. And all that allows you to do is once you're in the Bahamas, you've cleared customs, you have your cruising permit, you can fly anywhere within the Bahamas without any flight plan, without any more paperwork. You have your cruising permit, and it shows that you've paid your custom tax, but you have to have it with you all the time. So it's kind of like your little internal visa that you fly with. No big deal. It doesn't cost you anything once you've paid your customs fee. Okay, we've only got to the point where we're kind of finishing up our preparation to this point. Now we're going to get on to the flight planning. So I use a whole series of tools. I use SkyVector. I use 1X100 WX Brief, which is the Leidos. I use iFly GPS, which is Adventure Pilot. And then for a lot of the weather stuff, I look at Windy. Those are kind of my main tools for planning. I planned out every flight ahead of time when I was going to go to the island. So I had like 16 or 17 flights here over this 2-week period. And I just captured screenshots of them so I could pull up real fast and say, airport identifiers, here's my waypoints, here's my times, da-da-da-da. And I had all that stuff. I made a nice little notebook of everything that I flew with. However, what we found was, in certain places, they did not like electronic forms. They would not take ForeFlight. They would not take WX Brief. They wanted you to fill out their ICAO form. And then, this sounds so archaic, but they would take it and they would hand it or take it up to the tower, and the tower would hand key it into the ATC system, their ATC system. So, and what you're going to notice is, for example, this was the Dominican Republic. It was in Spanish. I couldn't, so we had to go up to a desk and actually have somebody help us fill in I had it in a WX brief. I had the plan, I had it all laid out. No. So we took it and we transcribed it by hand over into their form. If you're at an FBO, you can give it to the FBO. FBO will help you out. They'll get it to the tower. And it seems like this kind of varies. Sam was saying he's had no trouble using ForeFlight in Dominican Republic. We got rejected. So bring blank ICA forms, because your plans, they are going to change. I can almost assure you, things will change. Maybe you get lucky and the electronic are accepted, but just have a whole bunch of blank, even in English. Field 2 is field 2 here, and 3 is 3, and I think there's 19 forms. So I got to the point, I just made a little spreadsheet from 1 to 20 and what each of the different fields meant. What you need to know about flying in the Caribbean. A couple of key things. There's no VFR flight in the Caribbean. Night flight. It's not allowed. And it seems kind of dumb until you fly out there and you realize, because you're over the water, there's no lights and there's no horizon. So it's really IFR conditions kind of all the time. Cell phone connections, what we found is sometimes cell phone was spotty, but everywhere seemed to have Wi-Fi. So we use WhatsApp. We could make calls, we could talk with our group. WhatsApp was very helpful in the islands. Almost all hotels, FBOs, they all had Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi was real prevalent. Cash, use cash everywhere you can. Fuel might be able to be paid some places with credit card, but they're going to hit you with a fee. And we also had trouble with credit cards being stolen. There's a lot of ATMs out there. You will pay a fee. European power plugs come and go. Sometimes it's US, sometimes it's European. Carry your adapters. Departure taxes apply. When you're leaving, it's going to cost you $25, $30 a person, typically, where you're leaving. The one thing I didn't put on here is manage your fuel, because you will land someplace that will say it has fuel, but it may not. So you always want to call ahead and be prepared for fuel being in the $10 a gallon range. It's really expensive over there. So that's the one item I think I need to add to this. Fuel is a little bit of an uncertainty. Just be prepared. Don't get stuck someplace running on empty, so to speak. Now let's get to over water flying. When I planned this out, what I did, of course, is I island hop. And there's a few places that were a little further apart than others. So let's get to the elephant in the room. How do you feel about flying over water for an extended period? Most people get a little nervous, okay? So you want to get as high as you can. And we'll talk about the math behind that. And of course, you can go higher if you're using oxygen. You need to know how your plane glides. And I'm going to use a couple examples here and say 10 to 1. That's kind of a common glide rate ratio. So if I'm flying at 10,000 feet, I have about a 20-mile glide. Okay, that's pretty good. So ideally, if I have a 20-mile glide, I'd hope that no islands are more than 40 miles apart. I could get halfway, turn around, and glide back in the case of an engine failure. So that would be kind of my maxim that I'd really like to keep to. Right out of the box, Fort Lauderdale to Bimini, first stop is about 50 miles. Okay, so and it only takes 20 minutes to get there, by the way. 20 minutes at 135 knots, and you're in the Bahamas. So if you do that, what you're saying is, gee whiz, I've only got 10 miles that I'm outside of a glide range. So how do you deal with that? Well, of course, I can go a little bit higher. Maybe I just go a little bit higher for a short while, knowing that that will extend my glide. Maybe I go up for those 10 minutes. Don't even have to worry about, well, if you go to 15, you have to worry about oxygen just a little bit. But if you went up to 15, that's a 30-mile glide with no gap. You've just mitigated that particular hop. Let's talk about another one. This one's a little riskier, and Sam will be very familiar with it. Okay, most islands in the Bahamas are less than 50 miles apart. So if you're going to go up to altitude, you're within glide range. Most of the stuff is line of sight. You hop up, you can see the next place you're going. It may be 20, 30, 40 miles, but it's visual. Okay, here was a case where we were coming back from El Cate in the Dominican Republic, and we had a long flight, and then actually we were flying back over Provinciales on the way back to the United States. So you're going to notice there's not a lot out here. We said we'd fly over Ambergris Key. So at 10,000 feet, that is a 70-mile gap outside of glide range. 30 minutes outside with no glide, okay? At 15,000 feet, you brought that down to just over 20 minutes. There is a risk when you do this, and it's one you have to manage. Now, I can tell you that having gotten to this far, I've probably already flown 5, 6, 10 hours, plane's running great. I have high confidence that nothing is going to happen there. If my engine's been erratic, I'd have maybe a different consideration. I might think about this differently. There's really not another option. There's not a good option. You just have to kind of suck it up and trust your equipment, trust your planning.
If you have that life
raft
with you, the airplane doesn't make as many noises when you.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. It seems like when you hit that out of glide range, that's when the engine. What was that? What was that sound?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, there is truth there. Okay, so what if something happens? Okay, what we have is of course you have ADS-B tracking. Now, you ever see that little radar thing? Radar, you have radar range, you don't have radar range. Radar is good because if you have radar range, that means the ground-based units are seeing you and they know where you're at. If you go out of radar range, then you're relying upon air-to-air, satellite, or some other. But so ADS-B is a great thing, but it's not 100% covered from ground-based units in the Caribbean. Personal locator beacon. We use these, and that satellite. You push the button. I've got an emergency, and they're there within 10 feet of where you've landed or hit ground. Dual band ELTs, the 121 and the 406, of course, and of course your flight plan. You are probably on a flight plan, and you're going to be tracked, especially if you're on flight following. You're probably on radio communication. So there's lots of ways that you are being tracked even while you're over the water. Radio and comms. Actually, I thought the radio was going to be really hard out here. It wasn't much at all. The Bahamas are covered either by Miami Center or they're going to be covered by Nassau Center. English is pretty good, really no problem. Once you're outside Puerto Rico, Bahamas, Florida, it changes a little bit. I refer to it a bit of the Wild West. So we were coming into Caicos, and it's like Approach handled us all the way to the ground. And another airport, we were on ground frequency, and ground frequency is the one that gave us a departure and a clearance. It kind of depends. No one seems that they use the U.S. where you've got a tower, an approach, and a ground. It's kind of like they're on one of those frequencies. They don't change, and it's up to you to find out which one they're on. Clearances were in English, sort of. Sometimes it's a little hard to understand. However, ATIS and AWAS weren't necessarily. I was listening going, I don't even know what they're saying. I have no clue what the weather is. Anyway, so it's something just to be aware of and really kind of be prepared for anything. So we were coming into Martinique, and there's another story behind this. And as we're coming in, I got hold of this nice little French controller. She had to be cute. She really sounded cute on the phone. But we're talking, and she's got the very, very cute French accent. And I had a problem knowing where I'm going, so I'm telling her that this is my first time into Martinique, and I want to take kind of a touristy route around the island. The reason is I didn't know where the airport was, and I was having a hard time finding it. That's a story that's coming up. So it's kind of like we're having this chat, oh, welcome, da, 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 but very hard to understand. Another one was clearance out of El Kelley. This is an international airport, big airport. They fly, transports out, or airliners out of there. And so we had gotten fuel and got a clearance to, another thing about, and I'll show this in a moment, most of these airports down there don't have taxiways, so everything's a back taxi. So we got a clearance to go out, leave the ramp, back taxi down to the end of the runway. Got to the end of the runway, did my run up, everything's good, and I call for my clearance to depart. Nothing. It's like, 164 Mike Kilo, I'm here at, the runway, ready for depart. Nothing. I change frequencies. Nothing. Finally, on the radio, it's like somebody speaking Spanish. I did not understand what they said, and I'm like, can you repeat that? And it was just nothing. And I finally just said, just confirming 164 Mike Kilo, cleared for departure, boom. And so I stated my intention and I went. I never got a departure out of an international airport. I tried. And it happened to other pilots as well. And actually 2 of them, I don't know what they did, but they got tracked down and they got paperwork filed against them for departing without a clearance. So things happen. You kind of need to be prepared. Okay, so maps and navigation. You think this is trivial, okay? I've got Dine On, Advanced Flight, I've got updates, I've got my, all this, and I've got my knee pad, redundant systems, and in the Caribbean, there's Caribbean 1 and Caribbean 2 VFR charts. And I don't know how many of you guys have actually used them. They're really nice. However, as I'm flying, I was coming down from here, I turned on at Guadeloupe, heading down for Martinique. My charts just disappeared. Gone. The airports were there, but there was no chart data at all. Well, it turned out that somewhere along the way, the FAA had changed their chart plan, and everybody had the same problem. So the only way you would have found this had you went into simulation mode on your electronics, literally flown I don't do that. I pull it up, I got a new chart, it's like, okay, I know what my flight plans are, I'm going. I don't fly with paper charts anymore. I haven't done that in a long time. So this is why I actually, we got down to Martinique, and so I'm coming in from here. Now, one of the things the Air Rally Group does is they give you what's called a knee board. So every day you've got a knee board here. This is where we're coming from. This is where we're landing. Here are the frequencies. Here's the telephone numbers. Here's what it's going to look like. Fine. So I'm talking to my nice, cute French controller, and I'm like, I can't go straight. There's literally a volcano here. So I'm just like, I'm just a tourist looking at your island. And I didn't want to mention, I'm looking for your airport. So I'm flying around, looking for a visual clue. I knew it was someplace back in here, and I eventually found it. But the bottom line is, make sure your navigation data is complete. Runways in the Bahamas, these are international airports. Yeah, right. This runway out here, we are much better set up than most of those international airports. They're built on islands. You know what? Islands, property is valuable. Typically it's narrow. Here's Caicos International, runway, no taxiway. Bimini, runway, no taxiway. San Salvador, same. El Cate, same. Really cool though. You fly over the ocean, you come in. It's like a 8,000 foot runway. I mean, it's a nice runway, no taxiway. So the idea is, yeah, you need to be prepared for back taxi. The other thing is there's no crosswind runways. And in the islands, winds can be strong. They can be very strong. So before you go, you need to practice your crosswind landings. Because there's no VFR flight, most of these airports don't have runway lights. There's no VASI, there's no PAPI. And most of the surfaces are, I'm going to call them unimproved. There's chunks missing out of, there's rocks, there's weeds growing through the cracks, and these are their international airports. In San Salvador, actually there was wrecked planes from drug runners kind of shoved back into the trees, which was kind of cool. Be prepared for anything. So I want to give you this little story. As we were flying out of Fort Lauderdale, we had gathered there. We spent the night with a group, and so we're departing Fort Lauderdale Executive, and we were going to cross over Bimini. Well, first of all, you have to get a clearance delivery on VFR because that gives you, they assign you the squawk code then. So I think all of us were flying VFR, didn't do that. We just simply, we called up ground and said we're ready to taxi, and they're like, have you called clearance delivery? No. So we all got redirected. So, but what had happened was, heard my nice planning about 10,000 feet, 15,000 feet. We departed. They kept us at 2,000 feet until we were clear out into the ADAs, and then they released us and let us climb. Well, so much for all my great emergency flight planning. And that was the first time that we'd actually flown out open over water, and I'm looking down and I could see the white caps. Everything was fine, but it was, it's like the best laid plans. It was so much easier when I flew from, there's no reason why you have to stop at an airport. You can just leave from here, which is what we did, left from here, and we flew direct Stella Maris. And so we were at 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, whatever, and so it was much easier than trying to land at an airport. Okay, so first stop, Provinciales. You already heard my mechanical story. The one thing I can tell you is just spectacularly beautiful to fly out over the ocean. Get used to flying over the clouds. There's little low-lying clouds all over. There's also some higher flying clouds, but we landed there. We landed our 25 planes, and we got fuel, and everybody left except for me. Weather in the Caribbean. I mentioned the low clouds. Weather in the Caribbean is kind of weird because I can be VFR here, and 2 miles over there is IMC. And I make the joke about the coconut, but in fact, your eyes probably work better than anything else. So it's usually VFR somewhere. And you could be standing right here, and out there on the horizon, it's IMC. Most of the time, it's the little puffy clouds. Sometimes they're a little taller, they're a little higher. When I filed to go to Stella Maris, VFR forecast all the way, I got out just beyond Nassau, and my screen is totally clear. It's not showing anything, and I have a wall in front of me. The wall goes from the water up to about 30,000 feet as far as I can see left and right. And I'm like, this is, I don't really want to turn around. I am IFR, so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll continue on. I'll get a pop-up clearance. So I called Nassau Approach. I said, Nassau, can you clear me to Stella Maris? Nope, can't do that. Why not? They said, you're going to have to do that with Miami Center. Okay, no big deal. Can you give me their frequency? Yeah, but you're not going to be able to contact them for maybe 10 minutes. So by the time I actually had left Nassau, I was in the muck long before I could actually contact. So is that a reg busted? Probably, but I didn't really, other than turning around, I couldn't contact anybody. So I went ahead, I'm checking my ADSB, I know the spacing on our planes pretty much, so I went ahead and entered with the intention, which I did, I got a hold of Miami just a few minutes later. The problem is there's only like 4 reporting stations here in the Bahamas, and they are roughly, I don't know, 200 miles, 100 miles apart. They're way apart. And weather in the islands is very localized. So just because I'm here in VFR here, that doesn't mean that it's, which it was, I mean, VFR, and there was this IMC wall like right here, but none of the weather stations, and it didn't get updated on my ADSB. Okay? Things to watch out for. Lots of crosswind. Mentioned that already. And because there's only a single runway, watch your crosswind. So in this case, it was Stella Maris. We had planned to leave on November 2nd. There was 21 gusting to 24 directly across the runway. I made a decision to not go. I delayed a day. It might have been within the ability of the airplane, but I felt like it was outside my practice ability. I hadn't done really tough crosswinds in years, and I didn't feel like I was competent to do that at that point. So I use the windy tool. I look at the surface winds, and you can point right down at the runway, and it'll tell you what that forecast component is going to be. So going from Caicos to Grand Turk, yeah, I flew commercial. It's kind of interesting. The guy, I had the panel, and I look up there, and I felt really good because he had a Garmin 430 in his commercial airline. It's only 30 years old, but I'm like, okay, I can relate to that. International airport. This is kind of where we stayed. The group that we were staying with. It was. I would say something about going with the groups. We really stayed nice places. This is a view from our room looking out over the water. This was the restaurant that was part of the hotel we stayed at. Really neat. Now, so I got my plane fixed and headed Caicos to Martinique, and this was probably a 3.5 hour flight. Again, weather kind of all around. Had the volcano that I had to fly around. Flying about 160 knots. It was just a really, really nice day for flying if I wasn't trying to catch up with the rest of my group. And the thing about these groups, they typically schedule a variety of tours, and this was a rum tour we did. It was very nice. We went on a sailboat trip, we went snorkeling, my wife and I. We had over the water restaurants. Dominican Republic, we left Martinique and headed back for El Cate. Really nice place. We stayed there. You probably can't see it, but the ocean is right out there. We were not right on the beach. This is not Dominican Republic, but we flew over the Virgin Islands on our way. So we like the Virgin Islands, so we were just kind of touristy things, skipping along the islands, looking. At the Dominican Republic, there was activities. They got the ATVs, and this is one of our best pilots. He totally screwed up and got his ATV off the path upside down. You see, and what's he worried about? My phone, protecting my phone. This is our group that we went with. And then it was time to go home. Now, the rule is you have to land, or supposed to land, at the first airport that you come across as you're coming in. So, what I try to do is I try to avoid the Bravo airspaces. I try to avoid the Charlie airspaces. So Fort Lauderdale Executive is a Charlie. The rest of these are Charlie. This one is into the Miami airspace. Fort Pierce is up here. However, you have an opportunity to use what's called overflight. And overflight means you don't have to do that. You can, come inland and land at Lakeland, or which my flight was going to come back and land at Leesburg. Here's the downside of overflight. I had this nice plan, 50 miles, 50 miles, 50 miles, So I got to Nassau, and I literally, the controller goes, 164 Mike Kilo, your flight plan's not going to work for us. I'm like, you cleared me as filed. So what they did is they directed me from Nassau, direct Treasure, which is Fort Pierce essentially, then brought me inland, and I actually flew over Disney through the Orlando airspace. The bad thing about this is I was an hour, 30 minutes over the water. I did not really plan on that. The good news is, bad news, good news, I got in to Leesburg 30 minutes early, over 30 minutes, so I violated their time. The guy was pretty cool about it, but so yeah, totally messed me up. Now the other thing is, you're supposed to be flying along at 12,000 feet, and you're supposed to be IFR only. So what did I do? Being the fool that I was, I'm at 12,000 feet, doing what I should do here, and flying right into a 15-knot headwind. If I'd flown lower, what they want to do is they want to make sure that you're not dropping drugs or doing things illicit on your way in. But as soon as I hit the ADIS, what did they do? They dropped me down to about 2,000 feet. I'm like, why was I even worrying about this? So I would not have done overflight again. I think I would have landed at Fort Pierce, do the free customs, and come in that way. That was actually pretty easy. Returning to the U.S. from the Dominican Republic, had some long flights. This was over a 6-hour flight for us. I did not have overflight. I departed a day early because we had bad weather. And then we landed at Lakeland. That's where we were going to cross or do customs at. Landed about 3:30 in the afternoon. Lakeland was closed on Wednesdays. I landed a day early. I had not contacted them and didn't know. So I was bad on the customs. I was bad on the schedule. Miss, lesson learned, okay? So, when you land at customs, you can't get out of your airplane until they release you. You can't even use the restroom. So all the customs offices close at 4:30, can't get out of the plane. We've been flying for 6 hours. There's a phone number. I call the phone number and they say, you can go back to Fort Lauderdale and clear there, or you can just hop over to Tampa, clear there. I'd never flown into a Bravo airspace in my life. I don't know how many of you guys have, but I hear Bravo and I get super intimidated. But we're sitting there, our bladders are full. We only have an hour until customs closes. We can't get back to Fort Lauderdale. It was like our options were fairly limited, shame on us. So it was like, okay, Tampa, Bravo airspace, here we come. So here's the problem. Lakeland, Tampa, 27 miles. You know how much stuff you have to get done from the time that you take off? Because, Lakeland doesn't release you from the tower. So you've got to get your weather, you got to get AWAS, you got to get approach, you got to get your frequencies, you got to blah, blah, blah. You know the drill. So we were so busy, but I think the good news was we were so busy, I didn't let the whole idea that we were flying into a Bravo airspace intimidate me. It was like, okay, we're just going to go, we're going to do it. It turned out it was easy. Customs was really nice. They didn't say, oh, you don't have an overflight. Yeah, well, oops. So that could have been up to a $5,000 fine. I didn't know it. So part of this was ignorance on my part. So we got back, we got out of customs, jumped up to Inverness, made it home, and it was actually a pretty easy flight other than the little hiccup at Lakeland. So as I'm wrapping up here, I want to talk just about flying to the Bahamas, because the Bahamas is so easy. 700 islands, 54 airports, 100,000 square miles of just beautiful water. Customs is easy. They're very relaxed out there. Visibility is almost always VFR, even though you have wind. And you can get a lot of information online. So if you look at this is the main islands in the Bahamas. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, okay, there's the key, 50 miles. So 50 miles, 50, 50, 50, 50. You can see that all these islands are pretty close together. And if you look at the VFR chart, remember weather, here, here, here. That's about all you get. Let me zoom in on just kind of this area right here, because it's hard to make out, but just in this general area, which is Eleuthera and Exumas and Long Island, you can see there are tons and tons of airports to land in. And You know, within 50 miles, I probably have a dozen airports. Here, I've got 3 or 4. You get the idea. There are a lot of options. Once you clear customs, you get your cruising permit, they're all open to you. You can go anywhere that you choose. As I mentioned, we flew into Stella Maris. We had a beautiful little room. This was our lanai off of our room, overlooking one of the best beaches, top 5 beaches in the world. This was the restaurant that was part of the hotel. This was our group that we flew in with. There was, I think, 31 planes in this case. This was one of the Caribbean flyer groups. So we had just a fantastic time. So kind of lessons learned. This is not a vacation, it's more of an adventure. However, tell your spouse it's a vacation. Yeah, it's a vacation, dear. We're going, yeah, right. You can absolutely do this. If you have a plane with a range of 3 hours or so, you can do this. Trust your equipment, trust the process, over-prepare. Because if you over-prepare, you do all the things, and that's one of the reasons I'm here is to help you along this curve. It's like, don't do what I did. You know, these are the things that you need to include. It makes it more fun if you know that you're as prepared as you can be. Risks can be mitigated, or they can at least be minimized. You know, there are some risks that you have to consider, and it's not for everybody. But you know, it was so much fun. And it's a lot of fun doing it with a group. Thus, one of the reasons that I'm here promoting is to share our adventure and to get other people to do this with us. Enjoy the process, enjoy the trip, and then share with others. So the 2 trips that I have made, and they were both good. International Air Rally was the one that does around the Caribbean all the way to Martinique. This year they went to Bequia. This Caribbean Flying Adventures is Jim Parker. He does a lot of these trips on his website. The downside is you pay a fee for either one of these. What I'm trying to do is put together a group of pilots who have either done these trips, made it to the Caribbean, or interested in learning how and working with us, so that we can have some fly out groups. Hey, let's go to let's go to the Outcoast, let's go to Marsh Harbor, let's go to Stella Maris, and it can be a 3-day weekend. It could be a week long. You go over there. Maybe you want to sail. Maybe you want to scuba dive. Maybe you want to fish. But there's no reason why we're sitting right here and we're only a few hours away from a playground paradise, and we should be able to take care of it and enjoy it. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
What's your opinion of doing this solo without the group?
It won't. I don't think it'd be as fun, but there's no. When we fly, we're not flying formation. We're flying, with at least 10, 20 minutes between airplanes, and I have very little air-to-air contact. I don't think it's any problem at all flying solo. You're going to be in contact with ATC. No reason you couldn't. And it sounds like maybe, Chris, you did this, right? But solo, by yourself.
Yeah,
It's really not a big deal. I'm sure, Sam, you do it by yourself all the time.
Yeah, we just
He has a twin. There's a little bit of it.
I used to have an RV-10 and 182. Actually, when I had the 182, we left right, 2 days before Dorian wiped it out. We were over at Marsh Harbor. And I was fighting my weather. I said, "Well, we gotta get out of here." She goes,
I have a picture of a water spout.
From the airplane?
The airplane, not too close.
I just said, we gotta go. I went ahead, I had enough fuel before. I wasn't gonna get any fuel there, but fuel's good. So I topped it off. So we went from Treasure Key to Marsh Harbor, topped off, and just went north for a long time until I could finally get back over to Florida with the weather. But a lot of things like you and myself, we take for granted because of our experience, but just
Your experience especially.
just flying to these places, it's really, really cool. And it's $50 to land in the Bahamas, you know, basically, and 29 per
To get out.
person to get out, so it's not really bad. And if you have, like, I put in the sail tank, so I have plenty of fuel. So I'm not worried about fuel in all these little places. But once you get there, you mentioned the forms, you can get these online, print them up. I got a stack for the DR and all these other places in the plane, so you always had that when you go, no, I can't read this, we want you to do another form.
Yeah.
But, you know, like the cruising one, you have C, CA, and blah, 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 so.
C7C, C7CA, yeah.
Yeah, so when you fill them all out, and they're very helpful over there, most of the places, some of them, they're kind of rude, but that's kind of far, few, but.
And
Bahamas
we
is
can,
a
we
lot
can
of
help
fun.
you get all that stuff filled out. We had our cruising permit filled out before we left. All we had to do is give it to customs and they stamped it.
Yeah, they're really good, and after that, you're drinking a beer and.
And flying across the,
$20 beer.
What was the approximate cost
what was approximate cost?
for your journey? That's all I'm asking.
Okay, so when I did the Caribbean, I think it was that was an expensive one. It was about $2,500 a person, and that included all of our lodging, and it included some of our immigration fees. It did not include fuel, and it didn't include all of our meals. I think we did it for about except for my spare tire. I have to, that probably put it up to about a $10,000 trip. But, this trip here, actually, was about total of $2,500. My wife and I fly into the Caribbean for 5 days, give or take. Any other questions?
I carry a tube and a tire.
I do now. I do. When I ordered my spare, I'm like, okay, I want 2 tubes for the mains. I want 1 for the nose, and I had some other spares brought over. Yeah.
I have a question, I'm not sure if you can answer it, but, when we go to the DR, we stop in the Bahamas.
Mm-hmm.
And, then we pay the $50 fee and all that to leave. But if you say you're gonna be there for 30 days, and you take off and you bop around on the islands, and then you head over, can you head over to the DR and then come back and not have to pay that fee again?
No, but see, why would you pay you guys haven't, well, maybe
You have
now
to.
you have enough fuel. I wouldn't go to the Bahamas, I'd go right to the
No, we like
DR.
going there.
As soon as you land, you gotta pay that fee,
Yeah.
and that's the gotcha. There was no way around that, so every time you landed for fuel, you had a customs fee that you had to pay.
Exit too.
Yeah,
Chris, you got a workaround?
No, but I did have the lady, it was interesting because we went to like a little Connex box, right? There's 2 windows, and I go to this window and I go, yeah, we gotta do this. She's like, oh, you need to go to window 2. It's like
Yeah,
a bad
I
movie.
remember that.
And then, so I go to window 2.
And it's her again?
And it's her again. And she's like, I swear to God, it's like, yes.
It's like the
I'm like, it's me, same guy, I was just talking to you. She also
You have to get it
scratched
on.
out the $50 and wrote 75.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
again wrote $75 on there and goes, it's $75. I go, okay. So
Well,
with cash.
and you have to be a little careful because there does seem to be inconsistencies in some of the fees that you get charged. These are all published fees, and I think if you pointed that out to them, but yeah, I think that there's a couple of there's some people making a little cash along the way.
Well, it was like, say, ours was during COVID, so we were happy to just be there and get through it. And I think, again, it's part of traveling international kind of deal anyway.
They're like, hey, if you have an airplane, you can afford it.
That's their expense. So just bring a little extra cash and
Yeah,
and
cash
we're not
is
there to
good.
make arguments anyway. I just wanted to be nice and smooth. I did get I don't know if you talked about raft rental or anything like that.
Yeah, you can rent the rafts, you can buy them or you can rent them, Banyan's rents them, there's several places, you can rent them for $25 a day or
Yeah.
something, but by the time you get on a long trip, you might as well buy it. Again, I don't fly with the raft, I fly with the PFD, but I don't fly with the raft.
I was just scared enough. I wanted the raft, I had the PFD, had all that stuff, even though it was just a short hop to Freeport my first time.
I always thought, you know, all I want to do, if I actually have to ditch, I'm going to get close to a shore. I mean, as close as I can to a shore, and where people would see me, or I could, you know, swim over what I don't want to be is out in the middle of that 70 miles, out in the middle of the ocean. Good point. Other questions? Well, thank you. I'll be around here a little bit longer if anybody. Thank you.